Hello, Booktube. Today TBR, not November TBR, not this week's TBR, TBR for the remaining year, for the rest of 2023. Of course, I reserve my rights to change my mind about any of these books, add books or remove books, as I please, but these are the books that I expect to have read or be reading before the beginning of 2024. And first, an honorable mention. This book I'm reading every Thursday. I know I haven't read it last Thursday, and I'm gonna compensate by reading this on today, basically. You'll probably see the I don't know if I'm gonna post the poem first or after because I haven't yet read it. But probably because it's a shorter video, it will come up first. So there you go. I'm reading this as next exercise as part of the Poetry Thursday. Every Thursday, sometimes I intercalate with my own poetry Bible, which is like a series of approximately 100 poems that I've transcribed into paper. So often with my own translations, and there are my 100 favorite poems. That list is not complete, but that is part of the reason why I'm going through this book as well in Poetry Thursday, finding new poems that I love or might love after multiple rereads, because with poetry, unlike with most other genres, reading doesn't really give you much. You have to reread and reread, and hopefully and if possible aloud. So there you go. This is an honorable mention because I'll be reading this through 2024 as well. I'm just reading one page a week or a couple of pages a week, basically one author a week. So there you go. That's number one. Here. Another honorable mention, because I've already started this book and then I stopped because I kind of saw where it was heading, which is not a bad thing. It's just that I don't think it's a bad essay or anything. It's just that I feel like I'm not gonna get anything out of it, and I wasn't like particularly loving the reading experience, not because it wasn't well written, but because with nonfiction, especially of this kind, I'm not only reading for enjoyment, but I'm also searching for like new ideas and new insight into X or Y. And this seems it's supposed to be sort of like the text that grounded the idea of Gaia, sort of like Gaia as a sort of like, this Mother Earth kind of thing. The word Gaia supposedly was coined by James Lovelock. I don't know if that is true. I haven't really searched or looked into it deeply enough, but either way, it is a nice sort of like relaxed reading. So I'll probably finish this book just because this takes no time, but at the same time, like 10 minutes are time still that I could dedicate to something else that I might find more rewarding. Now, Neuromancer. What to say about this book? I don't know anything about it except that Fit to be Read put it into many of his tops and convinced me to want to read it. And I've heard before that this is sort of like the book that started cyberpunk. And I haven't read enough sci-fi to know if I like cyberpunk in the books as much as I like it in anime and films. But it's certainly a genre that I've loved in other mediums. So I'm just looking forward to this. I find cyberpunk an incredibly philosophically rich genre, food for thought always, and fun. So this will probably be a book that I don't have any sort of like necessity to read. I'm just gonna read it for fun, as unlike another of the books here that I'm reading for projects that I have for uni or stuff like that. Which is not to say that I don't like the readings of uni. I used to read philosophy way before going to university, and and I went to university only as sort of like a vocational kind of choice, to understand better works of philosophy that I felt like I could get more out of. And an example of a book that I didn't like, I read on my first year, and it wasn't in any reading list. I chose to read it to be ahead of what could come afterwards. Is the Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche. I don't generally recommend Nietzsche because it's there's a very particular kind of student that falls into Nietzsche in detriment of any other form of reading, and they never get out of Nietzsche. Uh, so if you haven't read philosophy, I don't recommend you to go straight to Nietzsche, but I definitely find him one of the most interesting writers in the genre of philosophy. Also, his ideas are just he's one of the very few philosophers that you are reading and you don't feel like, yeah, sure, that was nuance when you were, for when I was sort of like going through Hegel a month ago, I didn't feel at all like his ideas were nuanced to me. They were very complex and they seemed to be very elaborated, more than I could grasp in my very short time encountering him. But they didn't feel like, oh wow, you've opened like a new sort of like framework of how to look at the world. With Nietzsche, it was like that, and it was one of the one of the very first philosophers that I read that gave me that. The first one was Albert Camus with his sort of like absurdist view, more in his play than anything else, but also in Sisyphus Myth. I think that I say is amazing. But yeah, I'm gonna be rereading this. And that is because I'm doing a module, a course, which requires me to read some Nietzsche, and of all Nietzsche, I can only recommend this book. There's another book that might be good, The Birth of Tragedy. I haven't read it, but I've heard that it's also quite cohesive. But pretty much every other book that is not the Genealogy of Morals, but sort of like revolves around the same thesis, is a mess. Is a mess. There is no linear argument, and there is no like, yes, there are good ideas here and there, just like if you read Zizek, there are good ideas here and there, but there's no overall overarching argument. So I wouldn't recommend Beyond Good and Evil, for instance. I wouldn't even recommend The Antichrist, although it's very short and there is some ideas, but I definitely recommend this. I definitely think this is a book that is very interesting, especially not so much for like things like the will to power, or the dialectic of master and slave, which are much better. They have made much better iterations in other philosophers. The will, for example, is more interesting in Schopenhauer, and the dialectic of master and slave, I think Marx creates the more interesting version. But because of his tracing, his critique of like ascetic priests and a certain sort of like religious morality, and his tracing of Western morality as a whole, to an origin that is unlikely or unexpected, which is guilt. He considers that morality was born with the birth of guilt. Very, very interesting. So yeah, I'm gonna be rereading this, and that's all. That's all of Nietzsche that I'm gonna be reading. Now, oh, I forgot. Yeah, so I'm just gonna go behind cameras and back in. I started reading this book, Becoming Wild. Then I realized, I've been reading a lot of how do you call this, pop science, nature writing, non-fiction, and I started reading this, and it was amazing. I love this book. Like I only read the preface and like a few pages and the epilogue, because I didn't have time to really dive into the book. So I was like, okay, I'll start when I get to the Airbnb that I was getting in Stonehenge, because I was on the move and all of that you already know. But then I looked at another book that I had with me, which I bought because of a review of Steve Donaghy that he made for the Open Newsletters, which is Planta Sapiens. And I started reading through this, and I didn't like it so much, but I also wanted to read this one. So I was like, let's leave this one for afterwards, and let's read this one first, because this one still seemed very interesting. And yeah, I much rather get through the one that might not be as enjoyable first, and then I jumped into this one, which is not that like they are about the same topic, but they're sort of like the same within the same genre or umbrella. I'm already halfway through this. I'll talk about it very soon. I think I'll finish this book next week, and then I'll probably jump straight into this one, or maybe I will leave this one for the very end of the year when I am lost in a cabin in North Scotland, away from any human, as far as one can be from any human within the UK. So there you go, 2 more TBR books. Yeah, so this one is a possibility. I don't think that I'm gonna like get a lot out of this book, but I certainly want to read it. It's very short, and it fits some of the narratives of the ideas that I'm having lately. Because I am, so the way I approach university is like, I don't really like, I don't access to class so much because my degree is quite reading based, and the teachers don't tend to be very nuanced in what they teach, or I maybe don't like the teaching approach. I don't have much respect for the institution as a whole. So what I do is like, I take any subject, any course that they are teaching, and I look at the readings, and then I find my own way to fit my own interests into the essay topics or whatever, so that I can get to read the books that I actually want to read. And this is one of those cases. This book, I feel like it could fit very well my drama naturalist module, because I study philosophy and drama. I'm not just a philosophy student. And yeah, I think I'll probably read it. It's very short, and I feel like, this book is actually like a must read, supposedly, within sort of like philosophical nonfiction. This is a book that is constantly referred, especially especially like on the last few decades of philosophy, which are the most interesting ones for me. So there you go. I'll definitely have a look at this. And now, these 2 books are sort of like the ones I'm more excited to read. This is probably the first book I'm gonna be reading, unless I also have a medieval philosophy module, which I've been neglecting completely, and I don't know why, because I am actually very interested in medieval philosophy. I have heard that medieval philosophy is quite underrated, and I think so, because the very few texts of what would be considered medieval philosophy and the end of ancient philosophy, which I think ancient philosophy kind of ends with the Stoics, which is not something that I'm interested on anymore. But yeah, like, I don't know. I definitely wanna check it out. So if I mean, I have to do some readings for medieval philosophy, because I have 3 essays due in a month. So I'll probably read some Boethius or Saint Augustine, or I don't think I'm gonna read Aquinas. I didn't find him very enjoyable to read, and if I can find something that is interesting and also enjoyable, I much rather do that. So yeah, there might be some intercalation of medieval philosophy readings before going into this, but either way, this is a book I've been referring to forever, because I kind of read it. Like, I mean, I went through the book. I didn't understand much. I was going fast, and I was not this book. It was a different edition, but so I'm familiar with the argument. And whenever I read a book, I'll make a video about it, because if I tell you right now that Horkheimer and Adorno's thesis is that the Enlightenment was the beginning of Auschwitz, and that the only myth that the Enlightenment got rid of is the idea that the only myth that the Enlightenment got rid of was the myth of gods, and it was in in benefit of a bigger myth, which is the myth that we can ever end with myths, that humans are mythological animals, and that the modern belief that, like, reason could overthrow anything that was holy or in any way spiritual was just an illusion, because what was done was really to make a new god out of the idea of reason. I think yeah, many of you could be shocked or just strongly disagree with that argument, but it's kind of what they are talking about here. The biggest myth of them all is that there is an end to myths, or gods, or whatever you want to call it. It's a very, Adorno wrote this book over here. That one, Minima Moralia, which is my favorite philosophy book, probably. I don't want to say non-fiction, but probably my favorite philosophy book. Although it's not very philosophical, it's more a polemic. It's an attack to many different ideas and people and schools of thought. So I love Adorno. I've read other books from him that are not so enjoyable, like The Young Jargon of Authenticity. He's not as good as a writer as he is as a thinker. He was incredibly smart. There was a dinner with like a party that in which Thomas Mann, which is another writer I'm planning to read at some point, was Thomas Mann or Thomas Mann, yeah. He met Adorno, and Adorno was like teaching him music while he was playing piano. And Thomas Mann wrote a letter to another writer saying that he had met the greatest mind that he's ever met. And that's kind of how I feel when I read Adorno sometimes. Like, I feel like I'm reading one of the smartest people to ever be alive, one of the most illuminating minds that there are. And extremely pessimistic, extremely depressing to read often, but definitely I'm gonna be reading Adorno for a while. I think within the realm of philosophy, more specifically critical theory, Adorno is like, up there. Of course, I might read this and get completely disillusioned about my expectations of him because of having read that book. But yeah, I'm definitely jumping into this with a lot of hopes and expectations. And finally, The Dawn of Everything. This is the last book from Graeber that I know of. I'm not familiar with Wengro, but basically they both together work on this book for like a decade approximately. Published it. I first heard about this book from an aesthetic philosopher, a philosopher of aesthetics in Spain called Fernando Castro, which is the father of Ernesto Castro, which is a very sort of like mainstream but extremely interesting philosopher that's also writing novels in Spain, and that kind of like helped me a lot when I was getting into philosophy because he published his lectures. He was like probably the first guy on YouTube to publish like all of his lectures at university, so I had like free education for years before going to uni, which actually worked against me a little bit because it fucked up my uni experience, as then everything I was expecting from university was like on that threshold, and I didn't get that at all. Universities in the UK work like businesses, and vocation is not so vocation, pedagogy, there's many things that have hurt university, but yeah, so that's how I heard about this book. Then I ordered it, but I haven't been in Spain since then, so it's someone in Spain. I have the Spanish version of this book. And then I don't know, like about a year ago, maybe a bit more, I remember when I was sort of like going through Steve Donogh's videos for the very first time, I found one of his videos which was like top histories of the world or something like that, and this was one of the videos or one of the books he was talking about, and it reminded me of like, shit, I want to read that book. So I went to Waterstones and found it and took it, and it's finally become more relevant because of a sort of like I'm helping a friend with her dissertation, because sort of like she's writing an idea that I had, and that we both sort of like want to write up something more than a dissertation. Afterwards we want to like write a book, sort of like shared project that has a thesis that I feel like having an overall idea of the history of the world from an anarchist view, because Graeber um, was an anarchist writer, could be very helpful. And I also just like reading Graeber. I haven't read nearly enough, and I've heard so many things about this book. I'm actually super excited to read this book, and I will be probably reading this book while I am on that cabin in the north of Scotland, which means that I'll be away from every human, as far as one can be within the UK, freezing to death, running through the coast looking for driftwood to warm up myself, because I can get -20 temperatures there, and all I have is a sleeping bag. And then get back and read the history of humanity away from humans. I find that kind of cool. So yeah, this is the last entry on my TBR, and there is a possibility that I will also be reading this book because it's very short and sounds interesting. It's a Nomadology, by Deleuze and Guattari. Have no idea what it is about, but the fact that they are talking about like nomads, since that is exactly what I am, or errant or whatever, transhumant. Yeah, I feel like maybe I'll read this if I have, or maybe I'll take it with me to the cabin, but I cannot take much because I'm already carrying a surfboard and I have to hike for 3 days to get to the cabin. So it's not like I can add much more weight to what I'm already gonna be carrying. But yeah, that's it. That's my TBR. As I said, I don't commit to reading anything, but that is probably what I'll be reading, or along the lines of what I'll be reading within the next month and a half, 2 months. And yeah, please tell me your TBR for the rest of 2023, and see you soon. See you on the other side.